It's a great day for a great day. My name is Jeff Sheesby alongside my man, Ant Latino. Perhaps you know me as the old man who bets. Perhaps you know him as the odds fellow. We're here coming off one of the most exciting NFL weekends of all time. Asterisk, not protected the most profitable for me. But that's okay. I had a lot of fun. As maybe you could tell, maybe you can't. I lost my voice down in Fort Lauderdale. It is slowly coming back. But we're not here to talk about my throat, Ant. We're here to talk about some best bets. How you doing? How's the week going?
Winning Wednesday, great week. The cold is still here. We love talking about the weather. This is partially a weather podcast. But hey, maybe there's hope. I got out for a little outdoor run yesterday. It was like 40, maybe low 40s in the New York, greater New York City area. And that meant I was going to go out and pound some pavement. But look, weather aside.
The cardio king, Ant Latino, as they call him.
That's right. But weather aside, I mean, really a great weekend of divisional round playoff football. That we all got treated to. 4 amazing games, 4 walk-offs. I don't think I've ever seen that happen. 3 field goals and then a walk-off overtime touchdown. So, probably the best place to start is just hot reactions, quick reactions from the weekend. What did you enjoy the most?
Great games, bad bets is what it came down to.
So you were at the bachelor party watching these games with the whole crew?
Yeah, Saturday, and then Sunday I flew back. It was just in a world of pain on my couch, eating one of the best pizza I've had in quite some time. Zesty Pizza really nailed that one. But, I mean, games were absolutely electric. I was on the Titans, obviously. That was just a gross scenario of terrible coaching, terrible execution, terrible everything, even though I still think they were the better team. So not thrilled about that one. And then I was on the Niners, and that game was less exciting, but some good defense and a great outcome. And, the snow at Lambeau doesn't get better than that. I mean, maybe with more points, but nonetheless, pretty electric Saturday.
Yeah, no, I enjoyed it. And then that teed up, obviously, the Sunday games, which you didn't think you were going to continue topping. By Sunday afternoon, halfway through the first game, which was probably, 5:30-ish, maybe even a hair earlier, you thought it was done, right? When the Rams scored to go up 27-3, you either think it's done or you had shades back to the Super Bowl and you were like, go for two, you cowards, make it 28-3 and go for 2. They didn't.
I know.
It was 27-3.
I mean, as a Patriots fan, I've believed in that comeback before, so I was just kind of shaking my head, being like, this game ain't over. I had the Rams in a parlay, had them as an unofficial play as well.
Right.
I think
what I learned is I kept turning to. I was watching the game with the boys and my wife was around. I kept turning to people and then I would text people too, and I'd just be like, they left too much time on the clock. And I said it for the Rams game. That one was a little different. That was even more time. And then I still said it for the Chiefs game because the 2 timeouts scared me. But here's something to put in perspective. Again, bitter Cowboys fan. The Cowboys had 14 seconds left on the last play they ran. 14 seconds, we let the clock run out because we did something stupid. The Chiefs had 13 seconds to get into field goal range. So that shows you what 2 timeouts do, right, Mr. Mike McCarthy and your poor clock management. So that's end rant for the day.
Yeah, great point. I mean, great play, right? That was absolutely insane that they pulled that off. There were some great mic'd up moments with Kelsey, essentially being like, they're going, man, I'm going to set a pick for you, Tyreek. Executed perfectly. And then the next play, he says that seam's open. I'm running to space. I'm not running a route. Mahomes hits him on a pretty decent ball. So, I mean, Cooper Cuppian, I would say, in terms of X's and O's, great to see Kelsey have that kind of, not that I didn't think he had it before, but, in prime time, biggest game of the year, biggest moment of the game, and he's thinking critically about it, and they go out and execute. I mean, regardless of my Bills bet, that's just, as a sports fan, just really amazing to see.
Yeah. Well, one other thing I wanted to get your take for before we jump right into the NFL action, and we give you guys a short and sweet show since there's only 2 games this week, is MLB Hall of Fame. I know you're a baseball guy.
I don't have any good takes on this.
We didn't talk about this. Any good takes? Yeah, I mean, personally,
I think it's ridiculous.
I think they should be in. I think it's absurd. So,
I agree. That's the takeaway here for sure. I mean, and like Ortiz was also linked to a steroid scandal in like 2003, right? And it was like an anonymous source, whatever.
Right, but the guys you're going to see getting penalized are Manny, Clemens, and A-Rod, and then Bonds. There's the big 4, probably the big 4 names.
I always think about Lance Armstrong. Obviously, he got busted.
Right.
One of the most biggest. But everybody's like, well, this guy didn't get caught. He wasn't part of Balco, whatever. It's like if, cycling has a pretty rigorous blood doping scheme and could get away with it for a decade. Not to say that when there's smoke, there's fire, but you got to think that just because Bonds, Clemens, and Sammy Sosa went down for steroids, like, They're the only ones in the league. You know, the Astros cheating scandal, everybody's like, well, other teams are doing it too. It's like, just because you can't prove it doesn't mean it can't happen.
And that one to me is worse. I don't know if that's probably the wrong thing to say and think about, but the Astros one doesn't sit as well with me, and that's Yankees aside. That's just the type of, behavior that I think is ridiculous.
Yeah, and just like the fact that the Hall of Fame is like the moral compass here, where the MLB let their ratings skyrocket because these guys were using steroids and making millions and millions of dollars. I mean, if anything, it's like, whatever, Hall of Fame. Somebody's going to start a new one, a new better one. That's what needs to happen.
I love it. Well, let's start rolling through the games. I don't know where you want to start. I guess maybe we go in the order of the action, which I actually don't know. Sunday at 3 p.m. is Bengals Chiefs. 49ers are the nightcap, obviously on the West Coast at 6:40-ish.
Yeah. So you said the Chiefs game was first? I wasn't even aware of that.
Bengals Chiefs is first.
Bengals Chiefs.
Is that where we should start?
A great place to start. I mean, I think the hottest ticket item here is probably Jackson Mahomes and Patrick Mahomes' wonderful wife, and they made more headlines, or equally amount of headlines, as the Chiefs did. But this is one of those things where, one of these things this weekend is not like the other. And it sounds like the Bengals are that in terms of statistically not being as strong as the other three teams. But I don't know. They've beaten good teams all year. They've also lost to good teams all year. I think this is going to be one of the more bettable games, I guess, is kind of my quick takeaway on the Chiefs and the Bengals versus the Rams and the Niners. I think we see very similar DVOA difference on game 2 than we do on game 1. But, this is a Bengals team that, of course, has been performing way better recently. We've been looking at DVOA all season. Again, that's defensive value adjusted over average, essentially as looking at every team in every scenario and giving them a percentage grade of how much better they are than league average. So when we look at that, there's two stats, DVOA for the season, there's DVOA weighted, which takes into account games of more recently. So when you look at the Bengals here, overall, DVOA, they're 17th, but recently they're 14th. So they have been playing a little bit better. I still think their defense is going to be too much of a liability here. Weighted defensive DVOA is 24th compared to 13th of the Chiefs. And that's not necessarily saying the Chiefs defense is good. I think maybe we look for an over here. But at the same time, I think that defensive DVOA and an inferior offense, even though they've been playing well, is going to be an uphill battle for the Bengals this week.
Yeah, the over's getting hammered too in the market. Like, obviously this is Action Network data. I like to look some other places, but 34% of the bets, over 71% of the bets, but only driving 35% of the money. I still think that's the right side. I think it got steamed up even since it opened. It opened around 50 or 51. I think it's way up around the mid 50s right now, like 54 and a half. So it's a big number. But again, these teams put up 65 the first time they played back in week 17. Right.
And you got to think with them on that week 17, KC was only 3.5. Yeah, that was an away game, but then they lose, and now they're 7 at home. I mean, that feels like a pretty strong line to me. I think the question is, much?
Both of these were matchups, so we're going to get into the Rams Niners trilogy here. Obviously, this is an in conference, out of division game. These teams don't play each other every year, so we got the treat of watching it in week 17 when it did matter for both teams, right? So let's put that back on the table. The Chiefs at that point controlled their own destiny. If they kept winning out, including this game, they probably are the number 1 seed. Sure. Because of the loss, the Bengals really locked up the AFC North crown and slid the Chiefs back to, again, losing control of their own destiny and locking in eventually the number 2 a week later when the Titans won out. But one thing that jumped out to me, and I remember watching this game because I actually think I was on KC here. I just love the way they were playing leading up to this game.
Sure.
They had leads of 14-0, 14-7, 21-7, 21-14, 28-14, and then finally 28-17 at halftime. Right. So they were always kind of in a couple 1 scores, but a lot of 2-score leads throughout that first half, including a final 28-17, which means they would have covered the first half number. Then they didn't score a touchdown again in the second half, which is just not what you would expect from the Chiefs and from this offense and the way they got going. Yeah, they kicked the field goal in the fourth quarter, and that was it. Final score 34-31, right?
Right. And I think what's interesting, we look at DVOA as one level of comparison. We look at yards per play and points per play for another. And the yards per play, points per play comparison, 100% points to the Bengals. Yards per play on offense, 5.8 versus 6.1, pretty similar. You wouldn't expect a 7-point spread off of that. Defensively, the Bengals are actually leading in the yards per play, 5.6 versus 5.8. Obviously, lower is better there, neither of which are particularly strong. But again, you're splitting that. You think 7's too much. Points per play, we're seeing pretty similar, 0.431 versus 0.443 on offense, slightly into the Chiefs, but slightly into the Bengals on defense at 0.34 compared to 0.354. So, that screams all Bengals for me. And the DVOA, there's holes in both of these squads, right? Touched upon it a little bit that defensively, 13th and 24th, neither are elite. But offensively, of course, we do see 3 versus 12 for the Chiefs in that advantage. But that's one of those things where it's like Jamar Chase is balling, Higgins is balling, Uzama is balling, Boyd gets it done when he needs to, right? Joe Mixon can do whatever the hell he wants week in and week out. And historically, this run defense for the Chiefs, what is that ranked at? We got it right here, 20th, which is obviously not good. It's better when you look at weighted, but season long. And yet here I am, and I love the Chiefs, and for a reason that we haven't got into yet. But I would love your quick take on the yards per play, the points per play comparison, and how you're making sense of that.
No, I think that's super fair. I mean, I think another point that I pulled up too, and I was looking at, because if you look at the box score, right, and you alluded to some coaching mishaps, Ryan Tannehill mishaps, right, you have to compare the way that Titans offense has been playing or did play in this game compared to the Chiefs offense, and you just don't see those types of turnovers and takeaways that Tannehill gave up. What did he throw? He threw 4 picks or 3 picks? It was bad, right? And some of them were hideous.
3, and they were terrible.
3.
Yeah, first play on that screen, another one on the screen later in the game on the red zone. I mean...
And those are mistakes that Patrick Mahomes and Kansas City have cleaned up. For whatever reason, he's not taking as many chances. If you watch that Bills game, he was taking off. He was running more. Something, again, you hadn't seen him do a lot of this year, but shows that he's healthy. Maybe he was saving it for the playoffs and saving those fresh legs. He was willing to go and push and press and take off. He's also dumping down underneath if teams are sitting in a certain coverage that they're giving him, right? Again, you heard it earlier in the year, like Chiefs are dead. So I think you have a team with Kansas City that is not going to make those same mistakes that Tennessee somehow played right into Cincinnati's hands.
Yep. That all makes sense. And so here's what's interesting to me. Here's what's interesting to me. And, we've been doing this DVOA to spread ratio for the last, since like week 10. I forget what the exact record was. It was 20-12, that coming out of the regular season. So profitable. But, what we found here was that essentially looking at the percentage difference of DVOA. So example, the overall team DVOA for the Chiefs is 17.5. The Bengals is 0. So essentially the Bengals are almost the line of league average at an overall team right here. That's a 17 percentage point difference. So you take that difference and then we look at the spread. The spread here is -7. We divide the 2 and we get 0.4, right? That's a DVOA to spread ratio of 0.4. Anything between roughly 0.3 and 0.6 over the last 8 weeks has been pretty stock. It hasn't had strength one or the other. Those are games that I wouldn't normally consider. So I think we're definitely gambling a little bit this week. Sharpest lines of the season, end of the season, not where you make your profits. This is not where the grind really continues. This is where the fun happens. So this week at 17.5 with a 7-point spread is 0.4, squarely in the no play range for me. But there's also a different comparison that I've done on top of this, outside of just the number, which week in and week out has been looking at the percentage difference of all games and then comparing that to the spread as a strength indicator. So an example of that would be if you have 4 teams that all have a 10 percentage point difference, one is a pick'em, 2 are at -5, and 1 is at -10, you would conclude that the pick'em is a terrible line for the favorite, for the stronger team. The 2 in the middle are probably stock, and then the -10 is really, really strong. So what I did here to try to get just some more games, because only 2 games, not much comparison here, Caesars actually put out look-ahead lines for the Super Bowl. So wanted to see if we had anything there.
Interesting.
And what we find here is that if the Rams were to play the Bengals, that's projected to be a 3.5 point spread. The difference there is 21 percentage points. If the Niners and the Bengals happen to play each other, the difference there is 19.5 percentage points. Both of those are pretty close to 17 and a half. So now all of a sudden we've got two other corollaries, and those projected lines are 3.5 and 1.5. So all of a sudden, the smallest of those deltas at 17.5, which is the game we have this week, is at -7. That's way stronger than the other two projected spreads of a similar difference, and that is where I'm finding the strength in the line this week, and why I love the Chiefs -7. Does that make sense?
That makes sense. That makes sense. So you're comparing those other lines to see what Vegas would do with it, right? And how they're thinking about those matchups to really pinpoint, is this strong? Is this weak? Is this stock, right?
Yeah, and I always think back to Russell Crowe, A Beautiful Mind, baby, when he's trying to crack that code of the Nazi Germany's, bebop, bebop, the Morse code, whatever, and the numbers start coming out at him. That was this moment for me, because I was looking for something. I think it's a stock line. I was trying to find an edge anywhere this week, and I think that could be it for me. And that was what pushed me over the edge, especially past the yards per play, defense or points per play similarities. But that perceived line strength, I guess.
And I'll give you one other thing that supports your stance on the Chiefs. I think when the Chiefs defense got better as the year went on, right? Obviously, DVOA wise, still not ranked the best, but better. They got healthier with some pass rushers back. But one thing that I looked at, again, we talked about Tannehill and the turnovers. The Titans also had 9 sacks on the Bengals and a bad offensive line. Like, I'm saying good for Joe Burrow. He keeps getting up. The guy's a rock star. And
what was 9 sacks he said?
9.
Insane.
Yeah, 9. Yeah,
Insane.
9. He was, and some of them were like, he was getting beat up on, right?
Yeah.
But the Titans, and I looked a lot back half of the year at that ESPN stat of pass rush, run stop, win rates, things like that. What's happening at the line of scrimmage between the offensive and defensive lines. The Chiefs come in ranked 7th at 44% of a pass rush win rate. So defensive linemen, linebackers getting to the quarterback, getting that pressure. They're winning 44% of the time. The Titans, who we just talked about having 9 sacks and beating the crap out of Joe Burrow, they were only winning 39% of the time, good for 21st in the league. So, again, do you get even more pressure? What does that mean for Burrow? And then does that slow him down enough to keep up with a higher powered offense in the matchup overall? I think so. I lean that way. I lean the Chiefs. I probably lean the over, but that is a big number to hang. For me, probably look to see if anything starts slow and then live bet that total. I did that with the Chiefs and Bills last week. Got, at least a 3 or 4 point edge off the closing line. It ended up not mattering with the outburst at the end of the game, but I felt great about a number at 50-51 when the thing closed around 55.
For sure. And I think it's such a good point to hammer home of picking and choosing your spots, right? These lines are going to be the sharpest of the season. Find a number in your head that you're comfortable at taking it, and then once the score gets you there, take it, or don't. Never a bad thing to sit out of a game. Watch it as a sports fan rather than a short-term high volatility investor.
Get the popcorn.
Yeah, and Ant, we were talking, pre-show about we feel that this week is definitely a little bit more gambling rather than investing. So don't blow your bankroll on the playoffs. End of the story.
Absolutely. And with that, the second game, the nightcap or so of your Sunday afternoon to take you in, hopefully by 6:40, 6:45. We got the trilogy of Rams-Niners, a in-conference, in-division matchup, which is always interesting to see in the playoffs. Right. Teams playing each other for a third time. And one narrative here that you're going to hear probably hammered into your brains if you haven't already is the Niners and Kyle Shanahan own Sean McVay and the Los Angeles Rams.
It's true. No lies detected, and this is an interesting one as well because coming into last week there was only 2 teams left in the tournament that had a top 10 offense and defense according to DVOA. That was the 49ers and the Bills. Obviously, we're on both of them. Whatever you want to say about the Bills, they should have won that game. So I stand by that handicap. But that still rings true here. Not that the Rams are that much further behind. Weighted defense, we've got 5 and 6. Weighted offense, we've got 4 and 14. But this Rams offense does look a little different with Cam Akers back. I feel like the last 3-4 weeks, they've really started to hum a little bit. OBJ is, comfortable in the offense. And so I almost feel like that weighted DVOA number for them is a little inflated and should be ranked better, which is definitely a concern for me.
That's definitely what the eye test tells you, right? Especially the way they've jumped out in some of these games. I mean, what's interesting is they've had some big leads in some of these games that they've coughed up, including Week 18 against the Niners, which we'll touch on a little bit later. But I do think that number surprised me when I saw it because it feels like that offense hums along. One thing I wanted to talk a little bit about before we get into the previous matchups is just blitz rates here and what that means. And like, again, not something I particularly dive into, but once I heard the narrative floating around, some of this was feedback after the Cardinals wild card weekend game against the Rams, which was a kind of a blowout, and then the Bucs game, and those two teams really blitzed the Rams and Matt Stafford a lot. Now, both of those teams were pretty high in terms of where they came in at from a blitz rate standpoint. I think if I looked at this from a regular season standpoint, Tampa Bay was first at blitz rate, and Arizona was fourth, both at 33.6% or higher. So the Bucs number was a little bit higher. San Francisco's way down on the list, only 19.8, and they're on like the bottom 5 of the league. So they're not blitzing because they're generating so much pressure with their front four. But the reason I bring that up is Stafford shredded these teams against the blitz. He did that in Arizona, and he looked great in the wild card game, and he did that obviously in the beginning of the game against the Bucs. The Bucs actually started pulling back those blitzes and stopped doing it. Now, I don't think that's ultimately the reason why the Bucs got back into the game. It was a lot of fumbles, but it's an interesting matchup dynamic here, one that concerns me a little bit if I'm the Rams, because if the Niners can keep generating that pressure and not blitzing, Stafford is not doing as well under pressure as he is against the blitz, right? He finished the 2021 season with a 89.1 pass expected points added against the blitz, and that was the highest in the next gen stats era. So next gen stats is measuring all kinds of crazy things, right? But that's telling you that he's shredding the blitz. 7th highest yards per attempt, 3rd best completion rate, and he scored the most fantasy points per attempt against the blitz. So does that helps, right? The Niners, does that matter? You mentioned the offense kind of humming. Do you think they can still get going if the teams are just getting natural pressure?
I think that very much matters. More teams in coverage. I mean, does Akers change that? Maybe, maybe not. The man was running, fierce to say the least. But he also had that key fumble. But it's not like Sonny Michel wasn't running well. So
and Sonny Michel has postseason experience, which you as a Pats fan enjoyed.
Yeah, for sure. So that's an interesting one to me. I mean, I'm so torn, right? You make so many good points there, none of which I have a good rebuttal to. I think they're all smart. And I think that leans a little bit towards the Niners. I juxtapose that with my DVA to spread, and there's been one hole consistently over the last 10 weeks, and that is teams that are very similarly graded. Here we have a 2-point differential in terms of overall DVOA efficiency. So 2 very good teams with a line that's about the same of that difference, right? We've got a 2 percentage point difference and a line, 3.5 right now, which gives you a DVOA to spread of over 1, which in theory should be wildly strong, but it just hasn't found any consistency. There's been no trend to prove that, where there has been trends on the ones with larger gaps or smaller gaps and line strength or line weakness. So that's a concern to me. There's also a direct corollary to the last 2 teams that I had in terms of weighted DVOA ranked better as the underdog. That's first going to be the Patriots taking on the Bills. We know how that went. Didn't go very well. The Pats got absolutely spanked. And then we look at last week, DVOA ranking-wise, the Bills were better than the Chiefs. I mean, maybe this one we shouldn't take into effect because they just kick that ball into the force a return. They win that game. But nonetheless, that's the last 2 times we've seen a stronger DVOA ranking as an underdog. Both of those teams have lost. So for me, that points me to the Rams. But then the other side of things, we look at yards per play, points per play, very, very similar. When it's similar, I like to take the dog. And then to your point, which I don't know if you've even gotten into yet, the head-to-head matchups. Let's hit that real quick. The
head-to-head matchup is wild to me. And I mean, I heard this and then didn't think it was true. And like I think I heard this going into the regular season game. So this was probably going into week 18 when they were like, yeah, he owns the Rams. And these guys have close ties, coaching trees, relationships, right? I think you probably saw the tweet and the picture of all of these guys underneath the Washington football team staff before they let them all go under Mike Shanahan, and then they went and hired Jay Gruden. So good job, Washington. Quality effort. But that brings me to the point of like, he's 0-6. McVay has not beaten them since 2019 when these guys have been matched up against each other. 0-6 in this matchup. It just shocked me. I mean, you think about the Rams and all the success they've had, including a Super Bowl run. they haven't beaten a division rival once in 3 years. Like that's crazy when division games are split all the time, right? Like it's hard. And then I go back to, well, it's hard to beat a team 3 times, right? And that I have no data to prove that. That's just like
you hear that's what people say,
Yeah, I hear it out there, right? It's hard to beat a team 3 times. Interestingly enough, these teams have only played one other time in the playoffs. In 1990, the Niners beat up on the Rams 30-3. So this is the first postseason matchup, second overall, first since that time. Trends are meant to be broken or followed. I don't know.
That's the only corollary I have here is perhaps Harbaugh on the big game, and he finally broke through this year, right?
Yeah.
I mean, this is why, for those of you guys listening, we term this as a little bit more of a gambling weekend rather than an investor weekend, because I could wax poetic about a, DVOA strength that would make you buy in on the Rams so much, and the yards per points per play argument to get you to buy in on the 49ers with confidence. And then, 6-0 dominance, like, okay, is that due for a regression, or does he just own him? You could make an argument either way as well. Gun to my head here, I think I'm taking... I don't know. Gun to my head, I guess I'm dead because I took neither.
I'll save you. You panicked.
What do you got here, man?
So I think I actually am going to go official with the Rams. I mean, the one thing that scares me right now is the 3.5. I want to see if this thing comes down to 3, so I'll be watching it pretty closely. If it's 3, I'm there all day. If it somehow goes to 2.5, I'm there all day. Yep. For me, it comes down to 2 main things. I do think there's going to be some regression with that 0-6. That's a wild stat. But I also look at just the Niners offensively, and that's what worries me a little bit. Yeah, they came back in that regular season game, and the regular season is different, right? And I'm sure the Rams are regretting it because they could have kept the Niners out of the playoffs and not be facing this juggernaut that owns them over the last 3 years right now. But Jimmy G, who keeps winning games, credit to him, he's 5-1 in these 6 postseason games. But he also has a passer rating of 70.3. He's thrown for 730 yards, 2 TDs, 5 interceptions. Not a great stat line, but again, the teams have won 5-1. Obviously, that loss being the Super Bowl. Right. So to put this in perspective, Jimmy G during the season had a passer rating of 98.7. Right, so a big discrepancy in what he's delivering in these postseason games versus in the playoffs. You could make the arguments if it wasn't for the special teams discrepancy between the Packers, which I wish we would have spent a little bit more time on when we talked last week. I think we brushed over it. Mason Crosby in that special teams unit was garbage all season long, right? That was a huge DVOA discrepancy. It was a huge eye test discrepancy. But when you look at where, again, the Niners got that advantage, they actually come in ranked 26th overall, which was pretty low compared to the Packers. The Rams are 4th, right? So they don't have the special teams advantage. I don't think they have the offensive advantage, because when you break down some of the rushing attack stuff, again, the Rams are up there statistically, both DVOA and as well as the run stop win rate. They're 1st overall. DVOA rush against the rush, they're 5th. Like, they're not. This is a good defense as well, and one that I think, along with the offense, has found rhythm. Von Miller has looked better. Aaron Donald has been himself, right? So I just think it's the wrong time and a bad matchup. Now, the Niners coming hot. They can do a lot, and Shanahan owns them. But I like overall where these matchups net out. And, the last thing I'll point to is the line strength, right? Like, off of those losses, the 2 this year during the regular season, a 31-10 whopping when they were 3.5-point favorites at San Francisco. And then in LA, when they were, again, 3.5-point favorites and they lost 27-24 on a ridiculous comeback, that line holding at 3.5 to me says something, right? So I do think that stood out too. And I just think there's too much firepower here. So I'm going to wait to see if I can get the 3, but I feel good about it at 3.5.
Okay. And I do want to clarify one of my statements earlier when we were talking about top 10 DVOA. That was weighted only. If we look at the full season, the Rams are top 10 in both 8 and 5th for 5th overall. So that makes me feel a little bit better. I'm going to join you on the Rams. I think the line is good. It is. I mean, the DVOA to strength, right? It says take them, and I got to trust my system. I got to trust your analysis.
Trust me.
So I guess we're both living or dying. Either way, we're
chalk, baby, chalk,
weekend.
Chalk, baby,
give me the chalk. Straight down to the schoolyard, playing a little hopscotch and a little tic-tac-toe. And
one other angle for this game too that I'll probably mess with, and I've been trying to do this a little bit more in both NBA and NFL because I think it stands true, is I may look at the first half under. That's not official. I don't have the number yet, too. I could probably pull it up. The total right now, I think, is sitting overall at 46.5. Pretty stock to where these games have been. But if you looked at some of those matchups, including the 27-24, the most recent one, when the Niners were kind of themselves, the Rams were more themselves. These teams scored only 3 points in the first quarter. It was 3-0 in the first quarter. It was 17-3 at halftime, right? Both of those numbers would have went under any quarter or half spread. You saw this in the Rams-Bucks game. It actually started a little bit slow, even with the Rams' firepower. Stayed under thanks to an Akers fumble on a hook, 23.5. They scored 23 points. That first half total, I was on the under 23.5. I will argue that the outlier play of the Akers fumble, which I was blessed by the gambling gods, was fluky because Brady threw a pick to set up that scoring drive anyway, right? They should have punted and should have never even come up. So I stand by that result. And I think you just see these teams that know each other well in the playoffs starting slow, right? That game went under in the first half for the Rams-Bucks. It went over full game. Again, very similar corollary with the overtime victory in Week 18. It went under in the first half at 20 points. And then ended up going over by 4.5 points on the closing line, which is the same with 51 total points. So I actually lean the full game under, but I think in these scenarios, I've liked the first half under a lot.
Yeah, and interesting. I'm taking another look here at the DVA to spread, where I kind of concluded whatever, but I didn't look at this game versus the look-ahead lines next week, which is also interesting.
That's a great point.
We got a 2.1% difference this week in favor of the Rams. The look-ahead lines here. You have the Rams would be 4 percentage points better, so very, very similar there. And if the Niners were playing the Chiefs, the Niners would actually be 2 percentage points better there. But those lines are 2.5 and 1.5. So this is the smallest differential, or smallest delta here, and the biggest line. So I can see that being perceived as strength as well. So I would love to get 3 for sure. I feel
that's always the hope, but we'll see.
All right, so you heard it here first, ladies and gentlemen. Chiefs -7. I'm definitely on. Ant, remind me if you're on that one.
I'm coming with.
He's coming with. Buckle up for the ride. And we're both on the Rams. Haven't locked it in yet. Looking to get 3. Going to do some line shopping maybe this afternoon. And we'll take it from there. But as always, you can find us on Twitter, at Old Man Who Bets, at The Odds Fellow. You can reach out to 1:37 p.m., an amazing publication, 137pm.com. That brings you life, love, the pursuit of happiness, a lot of culture, streetwear, NFTs, sports cards, etc. Obviously, sports betting through the two of us. We appreciate you listening. We're here every Wednesday, 1:15 p.m. live coming at you, and the podcast is released officially Thursday morning, Spotify, Apple, wherever you get your podcasts. So we appreciate the downloads. We appreciate the tune-in. We appreciate the banter, the tailing, the fading, everything that comes with it. Until next week, this always will be short-term high volatility investments.